parental abdication of responsibility, handing that over to the government as if the government was the parent of the child. We have no future as a society if we continue down that road.
Hi, I'm Evelyn Rae. Welcome to another episode of the Caldron Pool Show. This has been a long waiting event, and I'm really excited to have one of our main contributors, one of the most read contributors of Caldron Pool, join me today. He is a homeschool father, he's a freelance writer, and as I mentioned, Caldron Pool's star, and that is Rod Lampard. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, there are lots of things I want to talk to you about, but I think a lot of people would appreciate getting to know a little bit about who Rod Lampard is. As I mentioned, you're probably one of our biggest contributors. You write so many articles every single week about a whole variety of things, and people want to know what led you to this point and who are you and who were you and why you sort of got involved in this space.
I come from a pretty rough background, dysfunctional family, fatherlessness, the whole shebang. And truth has been a really big thing in my life. So fighting for truth, getting past family lies and deceit and all sorts of things. So truth has been a big part of my process of healing and moving through victimhood to being, a victor in Christ, and finding Christ in a gutter. I literally found Christ in a gutter and went from there. And they just raised me up since then. And it hasn't been easy. There's been struggles, and sanctification takes process, regeneration takes process. It takes a few years to move through a lot of that healing and a lot of the pain to get it out. And I went from there I sort of ended up in Coorong and managed the bookstore in our local area for 12 years. And which was a surprise for a lot of people who knew me as a teenager. Some of them couldn't fathom that, that I was a Christian, that I was working in a bookstore, I was that bad. So, life did turn around pretty radically for me because of the cross and coming to Christ. And, I can only put that down to his work in my life. It's nothing that I did in particular. I went from there to got married and had 5 kids, and we went through some pretty severe pregnancy issues with morning sickness called hyperemesis. It's a situation where it's largely misunderstood, I think. I have written about it for Dads for Kids, and trying to help guys and women especially who are in that situation, have family who don't understand what it's like for these men and women to husbands and wives to go through the hyperemesis situation where there's just constant vomiting, there's hospitalization. It's pretty crazy stuff. And we encountered some rather heavy ignorance about it. My wife was criticized. She was, called, accused of faking it and all sorts of stuff. So it really didn't help us in any respect with that. But we learned a lot about it. And that sort of ignorance from other people forced us to learn more and find out ways that we can counter that. But 5 kids later, we're homeschooling. I have a degree in theology and ministry through Tabor. And 4 years ago, I contacted Ben, and just on the off chance that he might like some of the articles I've been writing on my blog since 2013. And he said, "Oh, yeah, give it a go." And we sort of went from there. It's got a history now. And I've been able to use everything that I learned from what I focused on. My major at Tabor was church history, and my minor was Christian leadership. So a lot of that involved political theology, and I kind of went in that direction. I was sort of kind of getting into that at Coorong anyway. I would often push Keith Green over Joel Osteen, stuff like that, just to encourage people to get back to the roots of Christianity. I did have some hiccups. I mean, I was part of the emerging church sort of movement. I was really into that. Rob Bell, the whole thing. But I did find, as I was moving through that, God sort of had me in his arms, I guess, and disciplined me to some degree with that. And I always had a heart for Spurgeon, and Spurgeon's always been in the background, grounded me in many ways, especially because we come from Pentecostal circles, and I've always questioned the excess, and that's never, that's meant I've never made friends because of that. But you get back to what the scripture says about certain things. And if you've got a pastor who is giving over the service, stopping the sermon and giving over the service to the Holy Spirit. You kind of, I don't know, question that. You're censoring the word of God, and I think that's an issue. So again, there's truth and falsehood in that, and I think, what are we really getting to there? So I come back to that quest for truth and the battle for it. I mean, I remember I was in a leadership meeting with one of the churches we were so heavily involved in, and I challenged the what I would call performances at the front of the church, and just the insincerity of it. It seemed to be the same people every week having these special touches from the Holy Spirit, and it really kind of made me go, hang on, there's something not right about this. And anyway, we were slowly moved out of leadership because of that. But it was a blessing in disguise. John got pregnant, my wife, and that's when we started having that journey through hyperemesis and things like that. And yeah, but I came to writing, and that whole quest for truth is part of why I work as hard as I can to help Ben out and get Caldron Pool, I guess, take it to the next level, and just to be the best that we can at what we do. World class, I suppose, is what we're sort of aiming for. And you're doing a great job with the podcast. I mean, that is excellent. I mean, that is world class. What you're doing is world class.
It's about you today, Rod. It's about you.
I know, but you deserve credit too, right? So, yeah. So yeah, my passion for fathering comes from that fatherlessness and that abuse that I received as a child. And now I've got an opportunity to help others, I suppose. I mean, even though I feel to some degree inadequate because of where I come from, I was raised in housing commission, welfare dependency, both parents were on it. Part of that informs my distaste for labor, and has done for a long time, because of how they encourage that dependency. And I suppose that also informs my relationship with God to some degree too, because we want to be dependent on Him, not government. I mean, that was the quest for 2 years. We were saying God over government, and that wasn't something sort of slogan that I sort of stood by. That was something I deeply believe because of what I've come from, and to where I heard the Lord is leading us in many respects. And Caldron Pool is one way that I can help others. I freelance at Dads for Kids, an organization that helps to inspire fatherhood and fathering, and encourage mothers along the journey as well, just to help them get to be dads in a world that hates the John Wayne stereotype, that hates the John Wayne kind of man, and to help them, help the dads raise their sons, to be fathers in that respect, to encourage them to be the best they can be. Yeah.
Now, if you don't mind, you mentioned that you were saved in a gutter, literally. And that tweaked my interest because I don't believe I've heard your testimony. I'm not sure if that's something you're comfortable with sharing, but I would love to sort of hear how it came about in a gutter and what happened.
Well, I've been dragged to church. I've been Catholic educated, Anglican. I've been like right across the board pretty much. And, at the Christian school I attended after the Catholic school, I hated Christians. More so the hypocrisy and what I would probably call a bourgeois kind of complacency, this middle class, we're Christians because it keeps us wealthy kind of mentality. God will protect us. God will take care of everything. And there's this absence of suffering, and none of that related to my pain. None of that related to the brokenness in my life at the time. And even with that, I was kind of, the churches that we were dragged to or attending, I had too much baggage almost for them to even be able to care for or to even work me through those issues and to disciple me in that respect. And so there was a lack of that. And I got into drugs and, self-medication, alcohol abuse. This was as a teenager. I started drinking when I was 14 and sort of went into, marijuana from there, and saw the seedy side of lots of things, and made some really poor choices, promiscuity, those kinds of things. And it wasn't until 96 when I was met up with a couple of guys from New Zealand who were over here talking about God in a way that I'd never heard talk before. These guys were genuine, they were passionate. I mean, this was theology of the cross stuff, not the theology of glory. It wasn't a comfort as much as it was like an epiphany, sort of an awakening. And I know it's going to probably make a lot of my Reformed brothers and sisters cringe, but Kenneth Copeland was one of the. I was listening to his one of his sermons one day on TV early in the morning, and it was talking about faith. And then I got a tape on faith, and I started listening to that. And I gave God 2 weeks, just to dig into him. I just cut everything else off, put everything else out, nothing from the world at all, just God and the Bible, and just sort of went from there. And at one time, the real catalyst was one time after a nightclub and a binge. I was sitting in a gutter, and sort of, I'd sobered up by that time, but it was now morning, and I just sort of felt this kind of still small voice say, put these hands down to me. The only way I can describe it is illustrated like this. I saw these hands come down and say, if you give me your broken heart, I'll put it back together. There will be scars, but I'll never break it. And that's sort of what I guess was sort of the main turning point for me. And it's been an uphill battle since. I mean, it's a weird way of describing it. I know that it's kind of an anomaly to some degree, but that's how I experienced it, and that's how I viewed it. And we sort of moved from there and started attending with these guys from New Zealand, started attending church, and we started a radio program, the local Christian radio station, and the youth program, and yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned Kenneth Copeland, and you're right, a lot of Reformed people, including myself, was like, when you said that. But I will say this, is that God saves, not man. And God can use whoever and whomever he wishes to do that. And it's interesting, I sort of had more of a Baptist sort of upbringing, not a Reformed upbringing. And when I was in my teenage years in high school, I went to a youth group that was very Pentecostally, very Australian Assembly of God type denomination, which is very different to what I am now. But it's interesting, I look back, and even though I would never probably listen to a lot of the theologians I did back then or really get much, I always have to remind myself that, God saves and not man. It's not by the will of man. And
I've never subscribed to Copeland's theology at all, or even followed him. It was just that one particular teaching tape that I had that just moved me forward, and I was just into the idea of what faith was and defining what faith is. And
he uses all different ways, and there are things that he keeps secret and things that he reveals to us, and the things that he keeps secret, we just, like why he does things the way that he does. And we just have to have faith in that. And, I'm grateful to hear that you have been regenerated, and he has fixed your broken heart, and he's never let you go. Because once you're a child of God, you're always a child of God, and he keeps you and he sustains you, and he's there with you every step of the way. So I'm grateful to hear that that's what he's done for you, and testament to like who you are as a person now, because as you mentioned, you have a beautiful wife, you have 5 amazing children, all of whom love the Lord. I take my hat off to where you've come from and to where you are now. And I think it's so important to celebrate just like the work of God in people's lives and their hearts. And, like you obviously use a lot of this to, I guess, write and to use your experiences to kind of rationalize your decision making and your position on things and your opinion on things. And so it's really nice to see. So I just thought I'd encourage you with that.
But I don't credit anyone for my salvation other than Christ. And it's him moving through the vocations of other people that brings that word to life, that
Yes.
living water, that fountain of living water. And I see a lot of that around us that goes unnoticed and uncredited. It's but yeah, I did, as I said, that the power of the cross, the transforming power of the cross, is something that I'm constantly coming back to every single day, and humbled by it. I mean, homeschooling is a vocation that I think is misunderstood, but I think at the same time we need to get back to this idea of education being in the home first. And
well, that's something I really wanted to talk to you about, actually. Like, it's probably a good segue, because you are a homeschooling father, and yourself and your wife have both done this and made this decision together for your 5 children. And homeschooling in Australia isn't the same as what it is maybe in America or other sort of countries. I wouldn't say it's relatively new, but it's not very heard of, and it's not often done in Australia. But as I said, you've done it for a very long time. I'd love to hear, one, your reasoning for homeschool, and two, sort of what got you started in this journey to begin with.
Well, at the start, I was against homeschooling, but it took me 3 years to really come around. And that was prayer and consideration, a lot of talking with my wife about it. And in the end, I was prompted by a situation that sort of, I guess, God opened my eyes to it. My second youngest daughter, she was at school, and they made her run a race by herself because she was in a composite class for some bizarre reason. And I thought, that's just ridiculous. Why is she running a race by herself? I mean, can't she just run with other people, even similar age group? She's in a class with those same people. And then she went to sit down next to a couple of girls from her class on one of the embankments, and they got up and walked away from her. And then the real trigger point was when, for me to see how, I think, not useless, but I think how the system needs some kind of reforming, the way we educate our kids through this, this structure that's been around since the industrial revolution. And she back to my daughter, when she sat down at the desk and she wrote on a piece of paper, "Will someone please play with me today?" Stuck it on her desk. The teacher thought it was cute, right? But I was horrified by it. I thought, wow, so we slowly started to see the spark in her die. And I kind of went, hang on, there's something right here. So it kind of informed our choices big time, and thought, okay, look, this is not doing anything for her. And then we started homeschooling and moving. That risky, it was scary, it was, all those things. We had opposition. There was family members who didn't really want us to do it. And the spark started coming back in her. I mean, we said that, even now, it's full of joy, and there's a lot of just her character is where I think God would want it to be right now, And that was through nurturing her and taking the road less traveled, I suppose, that making the sacrifice, fighting for her, and instead of putting her in a system that seems to fight against families and making strangers of parents and their children. I mean, we see that parental rights bill in Florida that's trying to fight back against that, which is a good thing. So, I mean, the schooling system, I'm not condemning it at all, but I think that there's a need for deep reflection in regards to a parent's, or even the society's attitude towards education. I mean, education begins in the home, and I think that this notion that somehow I can't do what the government can, or worse, I can't do what the government should be doing, is got to go. Our country and the people in it, I think, tend to be, and I'm speaking from, obviously where I come from, welfare dependent family. I've seen the welfare cycle. I've seen the mentality that goes with it. I've seen the entitlement. I've seen the generational cycle of poverty that comes along with the welfare dependency, the paradigm. And I think that if we can sort of shine a light on that, people might sort of understand that there's a real liberation in home education. And that doesn't mean that we stop socialization altogether, which is that big, phobia that a lot of people have about homeschooling. But it breaks with the government dependency that's out there, that the mentality of I can't do this unless X and X does it for me. Okay, there are exceptions to that rule, fair enough. And I certainly wouldn't want to have been homeschooled in the environment I was, which is why it took me so long to come around in many respects, because the schooling that I had was really the only stable environment for me outside the home. There was no other stable environment. So it was an important part of keeping me level and I guess on the straight and narrow, and it helping me inform my choices as a teenager, which I still made horrible ones. But because it was a Christian school, there were teachers there who I would say they were more concerned with pastoral care than they were about whether or not they were getting their kids past the XYZ, through that tick on next level. Here you go. That I've done my job. Now it's somebody else's. Here's the paperwork to show it. There's a real care for the soul of that child and in that process. So I think the Christian schools, faith-based schools, really have that. I think that's missing in some part from public schooling, and you see that now with the way that the kids are indoctrinated with climate change and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's this not about reason as much as it is about the ideological push to get kids to agree and conform to this particular mindset. This hive-mindedness that's causing that's something has been termed a mind virus. This rejection of truth and reason for subjectivity and emotive arguments that, as you see with virtue signaling, has no real goal but to convince people to go a certain direction without questioning that direction. So I mean, that's one of the things I think with homeschooling kids is that every morning we start with what I call God, life, and the world around us, and we cover ancient history, theology, some politics, modern history, and pop culture. It's a real way to contextualize what's going on in the world. And we do once a week, we do news of the week, which is a great way to get kids involved in what's going on in the world in print rather than what's on the TV. Because I have a real disdain for television news. 3 minutes, or maybe even not even that, plus an ad in the middle of it, or maybe 2 or 3, you get this kind of cut and paste image of what's going on, whereas a written article is going to give you a little bit more detail, because and I know from experience, it takes a bit to get those articles factual and to back them and to research them. And so it takes a lot more effort to write an article than it does to cut and paste and present a particular narrative. I mean, it's easier to do, I think, and control people with images and a soundbite rather than giving them some information and go, okay, read that, analyze it, let's talk about it, which is what we do once a week with the Australian hard copy. Sometimes it'll be Reuters or maybe even Caldron Pool, I think, But we get the Caldron Pool podcast up from now and then as well, and play that in the background. So there's all this stuff that's informing the process of our homeschooling that sort of fights back against that hive-mindedness. And the kids, I think, have a broad understanding of the world around them. There's no fear the way I was raised. There's no fear of climate change. There's no fear of, even COVID. I mean, we made a very determined effort to fight back against the hysterics. And we said, okay, we'll just be balanced with reason. We'll listen, we'll pay attention, and then we'll make decisions based on the information, not on the feelings or the hype that goes with that. And I think that's part of nurturing children in the direction they should go. And I just don't know if they're getting that in the schooling system, which seems to me to be hyping up a lot of this, these supposed problems, such as climate change, for example, which is highly questionable. I mean, it's not settled science. You got Judith Curry, you've got Peter Reid. I mean, these are all guys with doctorates who are being silenced because of it. Ian Palmer is another one, he's an Aussie guy. I mean, if they're not listened to, if they're cancelled, and their voice is not allowed, I mean, what's the system really teaching these kids? It's not a balanced, holistic education they're receiving. It's indoctrination. And that's, for me, I think that's a problem. I think for Australian society as a whole, I think we should stop and go, hey, maybe we're on the wrong track here, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've often said, and I've seen it myself with, education, even when I was at school. And then you see sort of like how it's been evolving. And it's almost gone from teaching children how to think and I guess how to come to logical conclusions, rational conclusions, using logic and reason to formulate conclusions, things like that. It's gone from, teaching kids how to think to teaching children what to think. And it's almost telling the sort of mentality isn't, here's all of the information without censorship, without bias, without subjectivism. Here's all of this. It's literally, you can read this and this is what you need to think. And I think that is definitely where a lot of reformation needs to occur, because you do see a lot of children, leave school and not really being able to enter the workforce or anything else with this ability to formulate and, I guess, practice decision-making skills. So I think there's definitely needs to be a lot of reformation. I don't think we should be telling people what to think. I think we need to tell people how to, come to rational conclusions.
I think logic is we've lost logic, civics, and theology. There's three things that have been booted out of the education curriculum. The basics of all, intellectual thinking, I think, in the West, academic thinking, and now it's all, emotion-based sort of stuff. I mean, woke theology, you've got woke politics, which is saying you've got to first acknowledge the ancestral owners of the land, and we've got to focus on that rather than A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I mean, okay, well, look, the Aboriginal people, Indigenous Australians, they have a place. They have a place in our history, and we need to recognize that. But do we need to genuflect to it? Really? Do we need to get our kids so focus so much on that our kids, or that's all our kids know, is how bad or how even manufactured to some degree, how evil white people are. I mean, and it's not just about white people in general. It's more that racist underpinning of the whole movement. I say, for example, Black Lives Matter, which again is not logical. There's fallacies that are thrown in there. We have to question those, and kids aren't taught how to identify things like a straw man or an ad hominem, or given that objective perspective. For them, they're not being equipped properly. They're not being prepared. They're not being well armed with the right kind of information. And not to say right kind of information, I mean objective truth. I mean the stuff that is well informed, that is well argued, that isn't divisive, but speaks facts to you about a situation or an event that took place. But even the SBS, I'm not sure if you've ever seen the documentary The First Australians that the SBS put out. We sat down and did that for our Indigenous curriculum stuff, and I was blown away. Pasco was on there, and there was a few others, and you could really see the bias coming out. You could really identify it, and the kids were able to identify that. But even SBS had to acknowledge that the relationship between the white settlers and the Indigenous Australian communities, are reluctant to call them nations. It's more a Canadian thing. The First Peoples, I think, is more accurate. Was not as bad as the hype suggests, or even claims. And so there's a form of misinformation and disinformation that's being taught to kids, and I think that's leading them in the wrong direction. There has to be a reason for that, and the only reason I can think of is that there are certain elements behind this that want children to think a certain way, because if they can get them to think a certain way, they can get them to vote a certain way. And that's the death of constitutional democracy in Australia. That's the death of freedom of speech. That's the death of freedom of religion. It's the death of, you name it, classical liberalism, Burkean classical liberalism. We'll end up with Robespierre and gallows. That's the alternative. That's the flip side, and I think that's a dangerous path that we're heading down. And I'm not sure homeschooling is the answer to that, but I think it's an overall review of how we look at education, what's being taught, and why it's being taught. And I think that's definitely necessary. But I think for parents who are concerned, I think homeschooling is definitely an option for them, and it's doable in Australia. I think New South Wales is probably the best state out of all of them to homeschool, because they function in a subsidiary capacity. Although my opinion is that overall, from a federal perspective, homeschooling is disincentivized through a lack of tax offsets, a lack of perhaps acknowledgement that this is a genuine, authentic way to educate children and to bring them up. So it's a reliable way to do it. I like the fact that there's a little bit of regulation, but too much is like we have, I think, in Queensland, I think, and Victoria perhaps. It's not good. Yeah. So the government can go too far. You partner with the government to get some kind of transparency there. Because I know that there are people within the Greens, for example, who consider homeschooling to be child abuse. Others would consider it to be overparenting. How is a parent loving their child into the world through nurture, balanced information, child abuse? How is that overparenting? Because you don't want your child to be a clone of everybody else or stuck in a room with peers until they're in year 12. And then suddenly, if they don't pass the standard of, the HSC standard, and they're under all this stress, their friends go off to university and they didn't pass, their world's ended. All their friends are gone. Because everything is packed into this bubble and they're taught to live in that bubble up until year 12. How is that socialization? Now, my kids have interacted with people from 84 right down to 0, right? I mean, they've got a really broad experience with dealing with different people and even different cultures. I struggle with the defense for the current system, and I understand that we no longer have a society where one parent can stay at home and still own a house. But is that part of this anti-family movement? Is that part of this anti-family agenda, perhaps, right? Where we have this situation, I suppose, where there is a houseless board. You can't have kids until you're 40. Even then, you still got to work your job like a slave and put your kids in school. That's the best way to go. Daycare, for example, look at daycare, and the daycares around Australia. I mean, they're largely funded by the government. And why? Because to get women in the back in the workforce. That gives them brownie points with the feminists. But how does that help the kids? If you've got a 6-month-old who's going to be sitting with strangers, how does that help? How is that nurturing a child into the world? I mean, and I know I'm not condemning mothers or parents with this, or mums and dads. I'm just saying that I think that we're being sold something that's not healthy. And I think down the track, we're going to pay for it as a society. I think we're already out of in some respects.
We already are starting to pay for it now. I mean, you look out the windows of your home and you can sort of see the state of the world. I think we are sort of, experiencing the consequences of our persistent and ongoing dabbling in things that aren't healthy for us and things that are not good for us, particularly the family.
Yeah. Parental abdication of responsibility, handing that over to the government as if the government was the parent of the child. We have no future as a society if we continue down that road. And you look at, as I mentioned earlier, I wrote an article this week talking about the engagement of dads in schools. It's a great initiative in Chicago, one of the highest in the United States for murders by a long shot. Yeah, that's right. And these guys have started this Mr. Dad's Fathers Club, and that's all back to basic stuff. They're just going to schools and read books to kids, and they connect with their own children. And they're all involved in that. It's a great startup. That, in some respects, is homeschooling. It's engaging kids, fathers and mothers engaging back in with their kids' education. Which is one reason why I've been so passionate about the parental bills coming through the US and protecting a parent's involvement in the education of their children. Because I'm, homeschool, and I'm pro, home education. I think it's just because it's the family unit has to survive, or none of us survives. Like what is it said? Uvalde, I think say pronounce it, Uvalde in Texas, that big shooting there. I mean, he was fatherless. He came from a fatherless home. And according to some stats from Dads for Kids, 26 out of 27 of the biggest shootings in the US are all absentee fathers. They were all had no father at home. There's a real connection here, I think, between absentee dads, absentee parents, and the state of society and where it's heading. Other than just the sin of the human heart and things like that, I think it's all sort of related. But there is this mental health situation that I think a lot of people just seem to be burying, in the United States in particular. I think Ben's article on that was excellent. People should go and read that. That was brilliant what he said, that it's a heart issue, not a gun issue. And I couldn't agree more with what he'd written. I mean,
I just wanted to read something to you. So the US Department of Justice have released some statistic about fatherless homes. So when you mentioned that you wanted to sort of talk about fatherlessness, I took this straight from their website, and I'm just going to read you some of these statistics because it is quite shocking. It actually breaks my heart. So I'll go here. 63% of youth suicides come from fatherless home. 90% of all homelessness and runaway youths come from fatherless homes. 85% of all children that exhibit behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. 71% of all high school dropouts come from fatherless homes. 70% of juveniles in state-operated institutions like juvenile detention and things like that come from fatherless homes. 75% of adolescent patients in substance abuse centers all came from fatherless homes. 75% of rapists motivated by displaced anger come from fatherless homes. So that's truly appalling when you hear those statistics out loud. I think that the family unit has been something that has been attacked for a really long time. You break the family, you break the nation. It's that simple. And who's the head of the family? The father. And I think that for a really long time, men have been ostracized. Masculinity has been deemed toxic. But really, it's the absence of masculinity in a man that makes that man toxic, because masculinity by its true nature is to protect and is to provide. Genesis 2:15. And I think that men have been unfairly taken away from their children by really bad family law court systems as well. I think that our systems are just like our education system, like what we said, it's too one shoe fits all. Like you said, the conveyor belt, and everybody just goes through it, and nothing is done on an individualistic basis enough. And that includes whether a mother should have access to her children, and that includes whether a father should have access to his. it's not weighed independently enough, and the circumstances are not weighed independently. And unfortunately, fathers have been the ones historically that have lost access to their children. It's almost just this weird thing that, well, the mother gets the kids. That's just how it's always been. And I think we're seeing and we're reaping the consequences of fatherless homes in our culture. Those statistics that I mentioned are shocking. I didn't realize about the mass shootings in America, that 26 out of 27 came from fatherless homes. And these are all things that are not necessarily the answer for everything, but it's certainly something that we should be talking about and that we should be having the conversation about, but we're not allowed to. Like, you know, it's just one of those subjects that if you speak about masculinity not being toxic, oh, you must hate women, you must not believe women. And it's just not the case at all. And it's really sad because our children will continue to suffer in many ways if we don't at least have a conversation and address the elephant in the room. And this is something you talk a lot about, fatherlessness. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think the answer is, how you think we combat all of these things, and what we can kind of do to sort of help moving forward.
As I mentioned, I think that the initiative in Chicago by Joseph Williams is excellent. I mean, it's back to basics, and it does operate on that homeschool kind of mentality that the education of a child is the responsibility of the parents, not the government, not a teacher. Although teachers can play an important role, mentors, things like that. There's another one too in Louisiana. A bunch of dads got together. They fed up with violence in the schools, so they got together and created Dads on Patrol, Dads on Duty, I should say. Sorry, so DOD, and they go to the schools. I mean, these guys are big dudes, much bigger than I am. They rock up and they got the Dads on Duty thing. I mean, kids love them. The kids are coming up, talking to them. And it's one way of policing, I think, but also one way of getting dads and men back involved in the family unit and taking more concern and care and concern for their child's welfare and well-being. I mean, from my experience, like I was pretty much left to my own devices from 13 and had to function as an adult and make adult decisions from that age. And while that, my mother has regrets about that. I don't think my father ever did. And that, I think, comes from his own sort of dysfunctional background, but also that me, myself, and I, a culture, that this self-centeredness, this idea of it's my freedom and my kids don't deserve to be part of that, or I'm scared of losing that freedom. It's real selfishness, I think. And I think the boomer generation, I've been critical of the boomers before, and they've kind of, jumped on my back and nagged at me. But I think you saw COVID and how boomers were in that time. It's protect me. We need to sacrifice the young in order for us to survive. And I think, again, it's sort of a reflection of what we're talking about. The boomer generation tend to, I think, have made a lot of mistakes. I think they tend to see themselves as some kind of God's gift to humanity. I mean, they're one of the generation that didn't have to go to war, didn't have to defend their freedoms. And yet under that generation, because a lot of them are still in power, we're losing freedoms and we're losing others. So I think there's a connection to their complacency and selfishness. And now not all of them are that way. And I'm not, boomers. I'm not saying everyone's that way. Don't start pointing fingers at me and attacking me like, I have been when it came to COVID. I acknowledge that there are a lot of great boomers out there, and you deserve credit, absolutely. But I think as a whole, there's the criticism, and there's a lot of criticism, both left and right, against the generation itself. It deserves some kind of conversation. Like we're talking about fatherlessness. I mean, they are the generation that were most responsible, I think, for that. And there needs to be some kind of, and I'm not saying we should go, oh, we're all victims, we should blame the boomers. I'm not saying that. I think that if we're looking from a sociological point of view at this, and trying to apply a theological answer as well, we need to have all the cards on the table, and we need to be completely honest about where things are and how things got there. And especially with the generations that are now coming through, who are confused about gender, who are confused about climate change, who even, some of them don't even really want to involve themselves involved in politics, because don't talk to me about politics or religion, again, because we've booted civics, theology, and logic from the curriculum. It's all now feelings and all sort of based on the subjective, and again, detrimental. So if we can correct that, if we can come back to bringing these things back into play, I think that we'll go a long way to fixing some of the problems, or even halting a lot of the regression we're seeing in the name of progress. And there's no way around it. I mean, I've been teaching with the kids Greek for a while, and I mean, I'm not an expert at it, but it's fun to look at just as a fun extracurricular activity. And you can have a lot of fun with the Greek and Latin language. And we just recently brought into that first form Latin, and it's just a fun little extracurricular. And the kids love it. They're really into it. I mean, if it's done right, it's not boring. It's not a grind. But it gives, I think it reminds me of how much we've lost, I think, in their education system through booting out things like Greek, things like Latin, things I think that are foundational to Western civilization. And it comes back to that, an attack on Western civilization from within institutions, from what David Horowitz has constantly talked about. I'm not sure if you're familiar with David, but he was an American ex-communist. He was part of the anti-war movement in the 1960s, but turned around after the Black Panthers killed one of his friends, and then got away with it. And so he talks a lot about that. But he talks about how the left has overtaken the institutions, and explains how, through nepotism, and through a lack of criticism, postmodern culture, things like that. Complacency from conservatives, I guess, will play a role in that too. So, I guess if people in our realm aren't innocent in that regard, we've been asleep at the helm for too long, I think. And we're just starting to wake up.
Yeah. I think apathy is the silent killer, and maybe not so silent these days. And I think that there are certainly almost like generational cultural shifts. And I think the boomer generation, as you mentioned, were very apathetic. They didn't really have those hard times that kind of formed strong character like previous generations and forefathers. Iron sharpens iron, and I'm not sure that they ever really went through those processes because of the position of the world at the time that they were sort of raised and brought up. And yeah, I think that we really do need to, like you said, put all the cards out and go, where have we gone wrong? Why are we here? Because we can be in a sinking boat and we can get a bucket and we can keep, lugging the water off out the side, but unless we find the leak to plug the leak, we're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again, and it's going to be futile. And eventually we're going to get tired, and then eventually we're going to give up, and then eventually the boat's going to sink. So we've got to really assess where the leaks are coming from. And figure out how to plug them for a long-term sort of solution. And I think that's certainly where we're at. And it's interesting, I sort of want to finish off today talking a little bit about Australian politics and where we are now, because the last few years, or a couple of years, a lot of us have been trying to plug these leaks, and we're trying to sort of say, if we don't plug these leaks, Australian politics are going to go pretty bad. The latest election, I think, probably went as not so great in terms of people like us who are more conservative in politics. But I wanted to get your thoughts on the election. I wanted to get, I guess, your opinion on where we go from here, what went wrong, and if there's any sort of hope to turn it around.
Well, I'm kind of hoping that Albanese doesn't become another Joe Biden. But, so far there hasn't been a lot of signals in that direction. But, I think Morrison deserved to lose the election. As much as I'm like, hey, my side might have lost this one, but the way that my sort of, the only way I can describe him in his 3 years as Prime Minister was middle management. And I know people say I use marketing, Scotty from marketing, but I don't think that's quite accurate. I think he took the middle manager road, because I come from middle management myself, so there's a bit of background there. I think he just was a facilitator rather than a leader, and that caused a lot of problems. I think in particular with his national cabinet decision was one of the worst things I think he ever did, and that led to him basically being to use, I don't know if it's the right one, it'd probably be, I would say a daycare leader of premiers. This is just like he kind of abandoned his office or abdicated his office and gave the premiers an ersatz prime ministership in each of the states, and they acted with that. They ran with the power, especially Labor premiers. They ran with that and did some horrendous stuff. And in some respects, I can't understand why we voted a Labor government in. But in other respects, I understand why that happened, because it wasn't a vote against, it wasn't a vote for Albanese. It was a vote against Morrison. It was an indictment on his leadership. Like I wrote in January that they should have put Dutton in as leadership. I mean, other people go, oh, no, we don't need Dutton. We need Hastie. By the way, that's a good choice, but Dutton's sort of first in line, I guess. And we would have, I don't know if it would have been a different outcome or not, but Morrison had to go. He'd already become stale. His leadership was already in tatters because of the fact that he abandoned his office to these premiers. And they smashed the Australian people. Like, okay, well, lockdowns, people are saying, oh, we needed those lockdowns. Did we need them as hard as we had them? I don't know. I don't think we did. I think we've been saying that for 2 years now. Is totalitarianism really necessary to fight COVID? And then the conclusion was, well, COVID needed a scalpel. The government used an axe or a bat. And instead of fighting the virus, they turned it on the war on the virus and the people. There's lots of evidence to back that up. So it doesn't matter, I think, in respects to the LNP losing, because we already had a Labor government in some respects over the last 2 years. Nothing much has changed, in my opinion. Now, I could be wrong about that. We might end up with some significant issues. I mean, there's certainly a lot further left than the LNP Labor Light was. Most of it booted. But I think the Liberal Nationals need to come back to God, first and foremost, the Menzies mantras, to get back to their roots. And in that respect, get back to the people and serving the people instead of the interests of the party. And I know that the Mark Powell did a great few articles on why why Morrison lost and why Morrison deserves, what his legacy is going to be and things like that. I really thought that he did well handling that, particularly the points about him not necessarily being a statesman throughout the last 2 years or 2.5, really. It's still ongoing in Western Australia, which is pathetic. But anyway, I'm not devastated by it, to be honest, and I don't know quite how to explain it other than there's a piece about it. I think that there are a lot of people are going to be surprised by what we see. I thought if people voted for the Albanese government because they thought they were going to get their first home, I think that was a poor choice. But that's pretty slim. There's only 10,000 places for that 40% ownership. So, and it's restricted. It's not like for everybody. I thought Morrison's idea of giving us access to our super to do that was a far smarter option. But, if you raise arguments, so that's why people voted for Albanese or the Labor government. I don't think so. I mean, even climate change, I don't think that was the biggest driving force between Labor getting elected, because they didn't get the biggest. They got one of the lowest votes in history. So, I mean, okay, well, what about the Teals? Well, they're well funded, those guys, and they're well backed. And there was a propaganda campaign that was smashed out there. Plus, you have this again. You had most of those replacing Labor light Liberals. So there's something you can't just say that. Well, okay, but climate change was the sole reason why. this guy's lost. And even with that, you see the attacks on Elon Musk. I know this is America, but I think it's connected with the arguments about why Labor got in. Elon Musk his biggest heresy is that he's preaching capitalist solutions when he should be preaching, according to the left, Das Kapital, right? For the left, the only solution is socialism. And that's the solution to all sorts of oppression and all sorts of problems, especially economic. But Elon Musk and others like him are looking to the free market to solve these supposed problems with the climate, or that are going to be caused by the climate. So he's off script. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not Labor does the same thing. They're already having issues with that because the Greens are going, I'm not sure the headlines, I think it was yesterday, saying the Greens are all up in arms because Labor won't rule out fossil fuels or using fossil fuels to avert an energy crisis. So whether Labor can get their head in the game and say, well, we're going to actually employ the free market rather than go in the direction of government overreach and bigger government to solve this, I don't know, it remains to be seen. I suspect they're going to probably increase government, not reduce it. That's just the Labor way. But it gives the LNP a great platform for 3 years' time if they can utilize the forces of the free market to solve these so-called problems with the climate, or that are being caused by the climate, to bring about a resolution or a solution or an answer. And instead of socialism or Marxism being the one way that we have to go in order to fix global extinction, or to prevent global extinction. So I think it's a strong point, and I think if we were to focus on that as an issue for the Labor getting, or reason for Labor getting voted in, I don't think is a strong enough argument to say that was the sole reason. Like I said, I think it was a vote against Morrison, not a vote for Albanese. I think the facts show that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel exactly the same as you. I feel at peace about the election. I think that I sort of thought that this is exactly where it was going to go. I said it will be a Labor government with a lot of greenies, and which was the teal votes.
I was wrong. I was wrong about that. I actually thought we were going to get a hung parliament, or at least a minority Liberal national government.
Okay.
I think it was wishful thinking, though.
Yeah. No, but I honestly was of the belief that it would be a Labor government. So I'm very much at peace with the election. I feel at peace moving forward, because, to be honest, Liberal Party and the Labor Party, they're birds of the same feather. You know, they really are. They're just at different and varying degrees, but we were all on the same trajectory, whether it was the Liberal Party, if they had have stayed how they stayed, and they weren't because let's face it, the modern Liberal Party is not really the Liberal Party. So if the modern Liberal Party stayed the way they were, it was just Labor. So it doesn't really make a difference. The thing that surprised me were the independents. I thought that some of the independent parties would have had more of an influence than they did. But to be honest, I wasn't somebody that really pushed or was interested in those minor independent parties overly. I thought they were good and they were great, but I didn't believe that they would ever take prime minister position. I think that we're not even close in Australia to be able to get there, but I did think that they would possibly take more seats than they did, so that surprised me. Did that surprise you as well?
I think the teal thing more raises questions for me than it does. It surprised me. But one I was surprised about was Dee's losing in to the independent. I thought that her outspokenness against transgenderism was an excellent platform, and I think that it was necessary. Again, if we're looking at truth versus falsehood, which is the driving force behind what I do at Caldron Pool and what we do. I think if her platform was excellent, and I was surprised that she didn't actually replace the independent that was there. Maybe there's deeper reasons for that within the community. I don't know, but that was the only real surprise for me, that Simon Holmes a court. I think he's the billionaire. I think he's behind the Teal Party, and I think they're not independents. You'd have to call them an actual bloc. They're a voting bloc, so you'd have to call them a Teal Party, not independents, because they're not really independent. They're aligned. They're aligned behind somebody, a backer who's behind them. So I think anybody who argues that they are independent, I think is stretching the truth, perhaps. But I mean, my biggest shock probably was that the Labor Light guys lost a lot of them, and that's encouraging, though. So yeah, that's probably the only thing that I was shocked by or surprised by.
Yeah, honestly, I'm glad that Scott Morrison wasn't voted for, because he deserves to lose. He spent his entire time as Prime Minister alienating people who would vote for him. His entire voter base, he basically flipped the bird to for years and years, and then he expected for us to vote for him come election. Like, the man obviously isn't very clear-minded about how you treat people who were loyal to you and who gave you, your vote. And so for me, like, he literally was a fence sitter. And I like to say this, Satan owns the fence. You got to pick a side. Yeah. The only thing you're going to achieve sitting on the fence is splinters in your butt. Like, there's just nothing that you can achieve for it, because you're alienating your voter base whilst simultaneously trying to please a group of people who are never going to likely vote for you in their life. It's stupid politics. It's dumb.
Well, I think Australian people saw through it, right? I mean, he would say there are no mandates, vaccine mandates in Australia, but we're being forced, no jab, no job. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, you're saying one thing, but the reality is very different. And I think that sort of meant, okay, people are switching off, not listening to you anymore, mate.
Yeah.
You're inconsistent, and you're obviously tone deaf to what's actually going on. And that I think is part of what I was saying about him abdicating his office and giving the prime ministership to premiers for near on 2 years, and they just did whatever they wanted with it.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what the Liberal Party are going to do moving forward. Are they going to, how are they going to tackle this? Will they say, okay, we need to start actually finding out what our voter base wants? Do we want to actually win back votes of the people, or are they going to become more left because they are going to assume that because they lost, more people want us to be like that? That's the big $1 million question I don't have the answer to. I have a horrible feeling that what they are going to do to try and counter this loss is they're going to become even more Labor in their policy, even more Greens in their way looking for sort of the future. I think that's where it's going to go. I hope it doesn't, because if you look at the Liberal sort of party throughout history, the more conservative they have been, the more libertarian, I guess, they have been, the more they get votes. But they were, I have this sinking feeling they're not going to look at history. I
think you're right. They need to be provide a clear alternative and a clear difference. Like I said, with Elon Musk, for example, use him as a quintessential example here. He is utilizing the free market, the power and forces of the free market, which is far greater, far better than any government collective can ever be, or centralized power, and achieving success in pulling people out of poverty or solving, emergencies, whatever they may be. The Liberal National Party need to harness that. And that same thing, instead of going in this, quasi-communist direction, which is where I think that a lot of globalists want us to go. And that's why I think that the Elon is hated to some degree. He's certainly not right or even in that direction. He's center left, right? So it's bizarre to see them attack him. And the only thing I can put that back to is what I've just said. He's preaching capitalism, not das Kapital. And then if he's going off script. And so if the LNP want to power forward, they need to go off script as well. And they need to say, okay, we're going to head in this direction. We see the signs, we're reading the signs of the time, and we can succeed if let's just get back to basics instead of, feeding this woke utopian idea of things, which is only going to end in a dystopia anyway. We know that. That's how all communist societies go. So you're right. It would be really interesting, and I like that, and I hope that he does something with the party. I mean, he did really well with the defense ministry. I know he's been criticized for his tenure as a health minister. Probably wasn't his forte though. But as leader, I think he's got an opportunity. He does have an image problem. Yes, that's true. But so did Tony Abbott, but he won in 2013. He won pretty big because he got back to basics. He took around back to basics. So it's going to be interesting to see. And I think for a lot of us who the last 2 years have put God over government, it's going to be we're going to have our work cut out for us in the next 3 years to help keep this government accountable through journalism, through alternate journalism, perhaps, even if we can in the mainstream media, so we can counter the legacy media love-in on Albanese and Labor itself, especially with the catastrophizing about climate change and their one-eyed approach, which is just like with the vaccines, mass injections, mass collective conformity. If you don't do it, you're going to be punished. Well, there are other solutions to this so-called climate crisis, and there are other opinions, opposing viewpoints. Let's look at them. Let's look at other options. And I think, again, come back to that point, if the LNP can do that and overcome the stale way that they've been presented through the affableness of Morrison, I think they'll win through and provide themselves as a strong alternative to what we're being sold at the moment.
Yeah, as you said, we have our work cut out for us. I'm not sure what that's going to look like practically, but all I know is as Christians, we have a responsibility to not just point and complain to things, but to live it out ourselves, to live the best lives that we can. And, that's the best place for us to start. And I guess we figure out the rest along the road as we go. But I'm really grateful that we could have this conversation today. I'd love to talk to you more, but we are coming on the hour. So before we finish off, where can people find you? Where can people read your written works, social media? Load us up with it.
Okay, well, Caldron Pool is the main one. And that's my passion. So I really like to write the political theology stuff and to really make an impact if we can in that direction. And I guess help the team make CP world class at what we do. Then as Dads for Kids, I freelance at Dads for Kids, and I've been doing a little bit of freelancing for candle decoration as well. But yeah, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the general sort of stuff. That's where people can grab a hold of me.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on today, Rod, and we'll look forward to seeing your latest article.
Thank you.